on my PowerPoint. Uh-oh. All right, so are you seeing a Zoom thing or are you seeing a PowerPoint?
We're seeing a PowerPoint.
All right.
But we're seeing the slide for Evan right
There
now.
we go. All
So
right,
I think you need to back one up for Melody. If you were starting with Melody, we're seeing
yes,
Evan's slide.
my mistake. Sorry about that. All right.
Fabulous.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you all for being here. I am going to get started right away because I know our panel's got a lot of really great ideas to share with all of you. So I am going to do a really quick introduction slide here. I'll ask them to kind of talk about it as it's up on the screen there. And then I'm going to start by posing a question to the panel, and then a few of them are going to share their screen and do an answer. So Melody, if you would like to unmute and do a little introduction.
Hi, I'm Melody Dvorak, and I've been with the Iowa City Public Library for about 10 years as a librarian. And prior to that, I worked in our little information page station, which has all the storage materials and local history materials. I worked in that department for about 5 years. As all of us librarians, I wear a lot of hats. So I do cataloging, I do selection, I work the reference desk for about 10 hours a week. I work on our digital history project, which is preserving historic photos for our community. And I added ODAA. That is other duties as assigned. And we have a lot of them, like I'm sure you all do. So we like to be a busy library and just, shine in whatever way we can. So as far as my selection duties go, I started out as a nonfiction selector for the second half of Dewey, so 700 through bio. And now, as of July 1st, I started being a digital collection selector. And mostly that is making choices about Overdrive, but we also study Hoopla, Canopy, Flipster. There's other projects like the Digital History Project and the Local Music Project involved in that, but that's a much smaller piece. So for all of that, it's about a $250,000 budget. So
Very cool.
that's what we do.
Thank you, Melody. And sometime, if you guys don't know about their local music project at Iowa City, that is a really cool thing. We should probably do a kernel or something about that. All right, next up then is Evan from Ankeny.
Hello, my name is Evan Anderson. I'm the Collection Development Librarian for the Ankeny Kirkendall Public Library. I've been in this position since 2013, and I had collection development responsibilities at libraries prior to that. I oversee all acquisitions of all physical formats and media for the collection, and then help advise on the digital collections. I'm also responsible for overseeing all of our technical services operations, so that's all the cataloging and physical processing, and then interlibrary loan. So a lot of things that all kind of interrelate and connect. Ankeny is a size H library, and we have about 140,000 physical items and roughly the same digital. Our budget isn't quite as big as Iowa City's. It's 150,000 for print, and then just 73 for all AV and digital combined. So we're a larger community, and our physical space is pretty big, but we are one of the lower funded libraries, especially by our size. So that kind of has an impact on what we buy and how we buy it.
I'm sure a lot of you will relate to that. Thank you, Evan. And next up is Tabitha at Scott County.
Hi, my name is Tabitha. I have been working, and can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Sorry. So I have been working in the Scott County Library System for just about a year now. My position is Public Services Coordinator. Like everyone else, I wear a lot of hats. I oversee circulation, our databases. I'm a selector for our digital collection and our juvenile AV. Before coming to work here, I worked at another smaller library, and I also worked in an academic library. I was involved with collection development there. I purchased fiction and a section, I believe the 700s, the arts, and some of the cookbooks and things at an academic library. I'm really excited to be here today. And I think that that's probably just about all I have to share about myself. Sorry.
That's all right. Good. Thank you, Tabitha. And Andrew.
I'm Andrew Frisbee. I've been at the North Liberty Library for it'll be 18 years in just a couple weeks here at the beginning of May. My first 10 years, I did all of the youth programming and youth selection. And then as the city grew and our staff grew, we sort of started splitting selection away from programming. So I went with the collection essentially. So I've been doing collection development for the last 8 years. So I order all the physical and digital materials for the library with input from the age programmers. So yeah, that's me.
All right, thank you. And Erin.
Hi, I'm Erin Horst. I'm with the Cedar Rapids Public Library. I've been here about 16 years now. The first half of my time was spent as a collection development librarian. I ordered all of the physical materials for adults. So all of the fiction and nonfiction, along with digital databases, like, again, so many hats. We all wear a lot of different hats, which is interesting. So at this point, I'm in charge of the materials department. So my staff and I work on obviously collection development, reference. I have a little IT department that handles IT for the library. We have our ILS admin in my department. So a whole broad range of things. So I'm excited to be here today. And if anybody has follow-up questions for me later on in the presentation, I've got my email address on another slide.
Great, thank you. I kind of like that title, materials manager. Doesn't that sort of describe all of those?
It encompasses a lot of different things. There's a lot of technical services in there, but anytime a material is part of our library system, it comes through my department.
I like that. I think that's an interesting title that I've not seen before.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and Kathy.
Good morning. I'm Kathy Leonard. I work for Des Moines Public Library. I've worked here since about 1997. I started as a children's librarian and moved up to information services and did social media for a while. For about the last 7 years, I've done collection development and cataloging. I'm part of a team, and we select everything for our 6-branch system, including media, print, and digital materials. And we also kind of go out and help the branches with different projects like weeding, or if they want to do something special, if they're trying to change their allotment of space, we kind of help them with those kinds of projects.
Great, thank you very much. Like I said, this is a really great panel. I am so excited to have them all here. I am going to start with a couple of questions. And the first one, we left a little bit extra time for this one because I'd like to have everybody kind of weigh in on this if you want to. So to my audience here, do you guys ever question how you make your selection decisions? So that's kind of the question I'm going to pose to the panel. Talk to us a little bit about how you go about deciding what it is that you're going to purchase. And the first person that I have up is Melody, and you guys can just sort of jump in after that.
All righty here. Let me pull up my screen for this. So I wanted to add extra context for sharing this information. I pulled this information from our website. It is the annual report visualized. And so we are a size H library too. We're proud to have approaching 60,000 cardholders. And last year after the pandemic, we had such a downward trend in CIRC, but we're finally back over 1.25 million circulations. So we're thrilled that that's happening. And for us, because selection is only about a quarter of our time for work, we do have 6 selectors doing that. So there's librarians who are in charge of different parts of the collection. And then we have 2 coordinators that work on the reference collection among their duties. So as I mentioned, I was the second half, before I go back to the nonfiction part, I'll prioritize different review sources depending on the collection that I'm buying for. And I know Becky wanted some list of review sources that I lean on. For when I was doing the nonfiction collection, if it got a star from Kirkus or Publishers Weekly or Library Journal, that was often just a buy for us, because we did want to have a thorough collection. We prioritize breadth instead of depth. And so just making sure that there was a little bit of something for everything was important to us for our adult nonfiction collection. And we also play a game I call Beat the Patron Suggestion, because we want our selection decisions to come out of that selection budget rather than the purchase suggestion budget. So for that reason, I hit a lot of the pre-publication announcements pretty hard. So Library Journal's a great resource for that. Book lists, Red Alert, I find they're often on the nose for what books that they suggest patrons want to read. And because our local area, it has a big university population, we're a college town. We expect people to be reading sources like the New York Times. So if they're hearing about books from the New York Times book review or like NPR, that's something that we have to look at to see whether we can add that to the collection. For the other resources that I look at, Book Riot is a newsletter that I read weekly. And that's often like a lot of publishing news. So I'll see that a book is coming out, next fall. But I know that, okay, this big author or celebrity is going to come out with something, and just pay attention to that as it goes. Baker and Taylor's Fast Facts email newsletter. For that, they show media mentions in that newsletter. So I'm always going to look at that section to see, is this something that our community is going to want? And then I also like LitHub's bookmarks for that kind of information. And with the bookmarks, they just kind of, they put like the review, or they have it between rave, positive, and panned. And if many review sources rave about the book, you can see that visually on the bookmarks website. Okay, so now about how I make nonfiction selection decisions. So I am a person who loves charts and formulas, and I need to think logically through a process, because we're talking about spending a lot of money on books. So several years ago, I made this wacky decision chart, and it's all starts with, is the author well known? And so I like to just ask all of these different questions to tell me, is this likely going to get checked out, or is it going to sit on the shelf? So with my slides, I just put every bit of information on the slide. So I'm not going to dwell and go through this chart. But it's just to like show a thinking process that you can use to, if your audience, if your local community loves art, architecture, landscaping, that little box in the middle, those are, the subjects that people like, but they're not the most popular. That's adaptable to different locations. And it's like, yes, I have a very formal way of thinking about how to make this decision. And fellow selectors of mine just use their gut, and because they've been selecting so long, they really know what a good book is, and I admire that so much. But because of the kind of thinking or thinker that I am, I need a process. So both ways are totally valid. And then I do want to mention that for our entire nonfiction budget this year, we're talking about $75,000. And I forgot to grab the number of items that we have Oh, sorry, I do have that information. The collection size for FY23 is approximately 53,000 items, and it takes it's about 17% of our total circulation. So our community does appreciate nonfiction, and that's the way I kind of go about deciding whether to add it or not. That should be my last slide about that one. Oh, sorry, stop share. There we go.
Did you want to talk about digital at this point, selecting for digital?
Oh, yes, yes,
Or did we
yes.
take that off of yours?
No, I am prepared for that. I was thinking it was coming later to bring in other people first, but yeah, let me go back.
Okay.
And sorry, one moment.
Well, that's my fault. You're right. We probably should have had that later. I wasn't thinking.
No, that's okay. I don't, yeah, I don't mind talking a lot, but I don't want to take up other people's time at the same time. So Overdrive is much more complicated. See if I start this right.
Perfect.
So for Overdrive, we have about 14,000 unique users. And I mentioned earlier that our overall card holder sum is approaching 60,000. But Overdrive does account for about 25% of our circulation, and it is about 20% of our materials budget. So this to me means that Overdrive users are often power users, and that's because it's easy to access. There's instant access and anytime access. So if you don't need a password change, you can do it at midnight if you need a new book. But because these collections are expensive, we have more constraints on what I want to buy for this collection. And it's not like these are supply and demand products. A digital copy can serve thousands of people. And it's just why the publishers want to prevent librarians from sharing this widely unless we pay up for it. So that's always in my mind, like, is it us against publishers? Not quite, because we're all in the same game, but we do have to consider the cost as a major consideration for whether we'll buy a copy or not. So I decided that digital collections are not going to be a replacement to physical collections. They're not going to be a definite duplication of the physical collection, but it's just supplemental. The budget is limited, like I mentioned. One constraint is that Overdrive content requires long wait times for the most popular stuff. So with our print collection, we might have a 3 or 5-to-1 ratio in terms of holds or user requests to the copy that we have. But Overdrive, it's going to be over 10 and sometimes over 20, depending on how expensive the book is. And then what are our users like for our Overdrive users? Well, they search for those most popular titles. And they also browse. So because you're doing it at home or wherever you are on your phone or computer, you have easier browsing opportunity than you do if you are standing in a library building and looking through the shelves. And because patrons want it all, we are just doing our best to keep up with the demand, with the money that we can spend on it. And going on to how I think about buying. So I divvied up my decision making into like 3 different buckets. Let's look at the content of what's in the book. We'll look at the demand and that we can figure out with some numbers, and then we'll look at the terms. So what is the publisher asking for? Do we want to agree to those terms, and will we have to spend a lot of money to keep this book in our collection? So going into that a little more deeply, and like I said, I wrote everything out so you can just have the PowerPoint and read through it later if you miss something. So with the content considerations, I will often turn to lists featuring those well-known authors. So like I mentioned, the pre-pub alerts, book list has a high demand section that's good to look up to see, does this author have a history of wide circulation. I think about how hard the book is to read, and this might seem silly or like maybe unfair, but people mostly read in their leisure time. And I feel like if we're doing reads that are bingeable, reads that will be spread by word of mouth, then we'll have better turnover. People will wait less to get those books. And it's just like, I don't want to make a person work for, their leisure reading. They can work for it if they want to, but I think a lot of people prefer to work through print, and that's just my own subjective opinion. But I do consider that if a book is easy to put down and hard to pick back up, then I might not want to add that, to spend a lot of money on that to add to the collection. And then again, the local audience interests. So my library serves all age ranges, but not all age ranges might use the collection in the same way. So I know for anyone with a lot of leisure time, I might be looking to add more of that content for them to get through, or for them to enjoy. For like people like me who's a working parent, I want to make use of every single moment of my leisure time. So like okay, sorry, I'm gonna switch tangents here. But for like kids, I'm assuming that a lot of kids will use a parent to help them get to a digital book. So I might think about in the terms of what does both the parent and the kid want. And then what users prefer, audiobooks to ebooks. And most of our collection, it's about half and half, but it does seem like there's some genres that do better at ebook format. So those super easy to read romances are one example. And I think thrillers and mysteries are also fall under that category. So as far as what can I use to tell me whether this book will be in demand? So have previous titles by this author circulated well? And if you are in Overdrive Marketplace, you can click on the author's name, that's a link, and they'll take you to all the books. So you can see, has this book or has this author been checked out a lot, or are people passing on it? If a series has a large loyal following, that encourages me to buy it. But if there's holes in the collection and it's one that we can't invest any more money in, we might have to stop carrying that series. And then I mentioned with the Baker and Taylor Fast Facts, they have that section where there's media mentions. So I think, well, how famous is the book? Did the publisher get the book and mentioned by a lot of media outlets? Like, is there a ton of buzz for this? Like, how many people are talking about it? So I know one book that did extremely well was I'm Glad My Mom Died. And not everybody knew who the author was, but everybody wanted to read it because it was just talked about constantly. And then what does turnover look like for this author genre, which is something you can use the Overdrive data to see. So turnover is just the number of circs divided by the number of copies. So you can find a book by the author, you can click on the items owned. This is like a little bit of a process, but you can like grab the purchase order ID and use the Insights tab to find that order ID. And when you click on the order ID, it's going to give you that turnover information. So I know I ran a Janet Ivanovich book on this, and isn't an expensive title, but it did have like a turnover of 18 for just being published in July. So that is good. And Janet Ivanovich is a big name, so we're probably going to get her, but that's just another piece of data that we could lean on if we had to justify that decision. And then, sorry.
Really quick, since we do want to sort of keep things moving. There's so many really cool things here. I could listen to how you make these decisions forever. But if you don't think, can we switch over? Maybe we can get back to this later and have Evan.
That's fine.
Adult fiction. We okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Like I said, I was worried about going too long, so
we're good. Thank you. Evan, do you want to talk about fiction a little bit?
Yes. All right, so I'm going to talk specifically about selecting adult fiction. And so what drives this, there's a component of our material selection policy that just says generally our collections are broad, current, and popular, not archival or comprehensive. So what that means is we just want the new stuff that's of interest. And like Melody said, we want breadth rather than depth, even in fiction. For our library, adult fiction is usually, and by a fair amount, our #1 circulating collection each month. So we devote the largest amount of our materials budget to it. It also takes up the largest amount of physical space in our collection because it's what our patrons are coming for. Choices are driven by the current interest. So if it's a popular author or it's based on a movie or vice versa, or if someone important or famous is talking about it, we're going to get it. I also give enormous priority to purchase suggestions. I fill over 80% of all purchase requests that come in. And that's just because I'd rather spend money on an item that I know someone is interested in. And I assume if one person's asking for it in our community, there are probably other people who won't take the time to fill out the form who are also interested. I do a lot of prospective buying, but the circulation rates for prospective buying are nowhere near as good as filling interest and demand from our patrons. And in reality, over the years, the reason that fill rate's hovered around 80% is that other 20% is either like esoteric or academic text that I just don't think will really have much interest beyond an individual, or it's out of print or just too old for our collection. But there are times where I will get, if there is enough interest, I will get the more obscure sounding things because sometimes a topic comes up in popular culture that can lead to a lot more interest. So during the pandemic, I bought a lot more books about being in pandemics, even if normally you wouldn't. So you still have to pay attention to that and think about how it impacts. Over the years, I've tinkered with a ratio of how many copies we need for however many holds we have. And when I started at Ankeny, the ratio is 9-to-1. And continually the feedback that we get from our patrons, especially with fiction, is the wait list is too long. When a book is popular, people want to read it, and popularity drops off very quickly for most fiction. Now there's some examples like Where the Crawdads Sing stayed popular at my library for like 3 years, but for the most part, within 6 months, people have moved on. And we can tell from reports that we run that there is a fair amount of drop off on our holds list. Ankeny is a relatively affluent community by Iowa standards, so a lot of people are waiting for the next John Grisham. If they're too far down in that list, they'll just go out and buy their own copy and drop off. And so that we have just brought that number down more and more each year to try and meet that patron demand. Because the reality is I'll get more circulations on multiple copies of popular fiction than I will on the long tail of less popular fiction. And I'd rather a book that's going out regularly and being of value to my community than just lots of extra fiction books that circ 3 or 5 times and then just rot on my shelf. In order to do the selecting, I do have a variety of different types of order forms. I do a lot of course, firm orders for those purchase requests. That means someone comes in and I say, okay, I'm buying that book. I place that order with a vendor. But I also like to have a lot of standing orders for the big ticket authors. I primarily use Baker and Taylor, and instead of having a standing order now, I use what they call their notification carts. They essentially build carts for you in their Title Source 360 tool based on lists of authors or series that you give them. And so I know, like with James Patterson, I always need 8 copies of his latest Alex Cross book. So they always know to provide that for me, and then I can order it. But the cart is nice because you can go in and tweak it before you submit it, rather than the traditional standing order where you're just going to get 8 copies. So sometimes I like to add or subtract based on pre-order interest from patrons, that kind of thing. I don't use reviews a whole lot with fiction, to be honest with you. I know that Melody said she relies on reviews for nonfiction, and I do as well, but with fiction, the reviews don't add a lot. So An example I like to give is Stuart Woods and his Stone Barrington series. He passed away recently, but he wrote 3 of those a year for about 20 years. And for the last 5 or 6 years, every review was, he's phoned it in, this is no longer up to snuff, don't waste your time. And even my patrons would say the same thing, oh, this last book wasn't nearly as good as his old ones. But the thing is, they kept checking them out anyway. And I would hear the same patrons every 3 months complain that the latest Stone Barrington wasn't very good, but then they wanted to know if I was getting the next one. So reviews for that don't seem really worthwhile to me, because I don't care if it's poor quality, I care if it has high interest. And that might kind of seem odd, but quality concern is much more important to me with nonfiction than it is fiction. Interest is what drives it. I want to get stuff that people are actually going to read. That does mean I spend a lot more time looking at things like bestseller list, like New York Times bestseller list, of course, and then things like the commercial book clubs that are out there now. My community loves Reese's, they love Oprah's, they love Jenner Hager's, and so I buy multiple copies of those every month. I also look at the marketing budgets and print runs for books, because in my experience, if a publisher is going to invest a lot of money in either making a lot of physical copies or they're going to spend a lot of money flooding media about it, there will be high demand for it. So for example, I think it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, The Girls had $1 million sale, and they advertised the fact that this first-time author had a book deal for $1 million. And so everyone was going to want to go out and buy that book. When it comes to the debate between buying, low fiction or classic literature, I don't really care about it unless it's of interest. So just recently, a new translation of the Iliad came out, but it garnered a lot of media attention, so I bought it. But that doesn't mean I have some desire to buy lots of classics that are just going to sit on the shelf. Some things are perennially popular, and at least in Ankeny, we get a lot of students who are taking AP classes, DMAT classes, who are doing college readiness. So a certain element of those kinds of fictional works that show up on those lists we maintain and keep. But just because something has been around for 150 years doesn't mean it's something I'm going to spend any money on. I know in one of the presentations that Becky did earlier, she talked about award lists. And I think award lists can be good, but you really need to know your audience. Ankeny residents, by and large, don't care about Pulitzers, and they really don't care about the Nobel Prize for Literature. So if there are some awards like the National Book Award they do enjoy, popular awards like Hugo's and Nebulas and Christie's and Rita's and Daggers for various genres like mystery and romance and religion, those do really well, so I buy them. I don't make a big effort to, after each time the Nobel is announced, to go back and fill up my collection with those. I might get the most recent one, and then if that generates interest, then I'll go back and get more. And then lastly, I think especially when it comes to fiction, nowadays you need to be willing to purchase self-published materials. When I was in library school, we still talked about vanity presses and we weren't supposed to buy self-published and avoid that. But now so many authors become extremely popular because of things like Book Talk that you can't just turn your nose up at it. And so if it's of interest, you need to buy it. And there are a lot of really major authors right now like Frida McFadden, Rebecca Yarros, Colleen Hoover, who most of their stuff is self-published, although many of them are now being picked up by major publishers because of their popularity. But I spend a lot of time on Amazon looking at the popular lists of the self-published things and getting them for the collection, and they do really well here. I know I flew through that really quickly, but in general, if it's popular and of interest, it's being talked about in the media, that's what I care about, rather than reviews or trying to make sure I build the best collection. It's a collection of interest rather than some kind of standard, if that makes sense.
Great. Thank you, Evan. And we've had a couple of questions come in, but I think to sort of keep things moving, we'll hang on to the questions till the end to make sure that we've got time for those. If for some reason we don't have time for that, what I might do is cut and paste those and ask you guys to do something written on a couple of those. So Tabitha, do you want to talk a little bit about Overdrive?
Sure. I don't have a slide to share with you guys, but like Melody, we go through, we look at the requests. Overdrive has really changed. Now, you don't actually get a request to purchase, you just get where people have done a notify me. I've only been at this library for a year, and I've spent pretty much my entire year trying to get to know who's reading, what are they reading, what do they like. When a new book comes out, I find the author, I go into Overdrive, I look at how many of their titles have we had, how many times have they circulated. I'm always questioning whether I'm making the right decisions, am I buying the right things. We run reports, we look at things that we call DOA, dead on arrival, they don't check out at all, or maybe they get 1 or 2 circs. And I have been working to try and steer myself away from buying things like that. It's a balance. Always trying to figure out, what do these people need? Our readers in Overdrive are different than our readers who take physical books, different taste, different group. I don't know that I have much more to add on that. We, like I said, pretty much do the same thing that Melody covered, looking at what's circulating, what's popular.
Great, thank you. Andrew, did you have stuff to add to that?
Excuse me. We're sort of in a unique position because North Liberty shares the collection with Iowa City. So we're kind of beneficiaries of a lot of Melody's work. So I feel my role has, like, we order additional copies of like the high demand stuff, and then occasional like smaller scale, usually like teen stuff that that didn't get ordered. So yeah, I feel a lot of like I feel I'm doing a lot of maintenance on Overdrive in terms of like filling gaps and like ordering extra copies, um, because of the role that the three of us share.
Great. Oh, thank you. That I think brings something new into the mix. The idea, especially when we think about consortia, because of our Bridges consortia, I really encourage people to do exactly what you just said, and that is add to it things that we've missed at the state level, or to buy extra copies to make those wait lists go down for your patrons. Good, thank you. All right, so let's head on to our second question then. Unless, is there anybody else who would like to talk to that idea of how you make those selection decisions? All right, then our next question, and we've hit on this just a little bit with the downloadables, but I always found it really difficult to purchase AV materials. It was a lot harder to find reviews and information about what was coming out. Pre-pub stuff at the time anyway was difficult to find, and my process was a little bit different from how I purchase print materials. So I want to have some of the panelists talk a little bit about how they manage their AV collections. And Evan, I think we've got you up first for this.
Yeah, so with AV, it can be tricky because there's a wide variety of things that are AV, and how you approach them varies from format to format. The high-level criteria for selecting is the same as for print. So when I'm looking at AV that's fictional or entertainment, I approach it in the same way, less concerned with specific gatekeeping of quality as I am meeting popular demand. But when it comes to the format itself, there are a lot of things that can drive my individual decision making. So age is a big factor. And so one of the collections that we have are playaways, which are those solid state memory single book resources. They are hugely popular with our younger crowd. So the elementary age and down. And then they're popular with a subset of our adult crowd. But the in-between, so tweens, teens, and younger adults, they don't use our playaways because they prefer to use downloadables on their mobile device. Little kids, I know some have phones, but most little kids don't have devices that they can download lots of books onto, and a certain set of our older crowd don't want to learn those tools. So when I buy playaways, I think about, is this a really good tool for that age group? And then I honestly, like with young adults, for example, I think it's probably been 6 months since I bought a playaway. I also am concerned with the sourcing, because you can get AV from a lot of places, and I worry about the cost, the speed, and then we try to do as much shelf-ready processing as we can because we have limited staff and limited staff time. In the city of Ankeny, we always joke it's easier to get things rather than people. And so I can get the city to agree to spend more money on something like processing than getting another human being to do the work here. So for audiobooks on CD, I can get it basically ready for the shelf from Blackstone. So I go with them first, and then if they can't provide an audiobook on CD, then I try Baker and Taylor, who can do quite a bit. And if that fails, then I do Amazon. But conversely, with movies, nobody can get it to me faster or cheaper than Amazon. So at this point, I do almost all of my movie purchasing through them. And then with movies, they present a particular challenge these days because streaming services are taking over everything, and there are fewer and fewer movies being released on disc, or by the time they come out on disc, they're no longer that popular. And so, I mean, it's readily apparent if you look at the list of the recent Oscar winners, for example, which people are very interested in. I think I can only get about a third of them in a physical format anymore. And very frustratingly for patrons, popular TV shows that started out on physical formats are now streaming only. So you can only get the first couple of seasons and then it's cut off. And so my response to that has been, well, since there's not that much there, we're pulling that out of spending on physical format items and pushing it into our digital collections to try and make up for that gap. But it is a bit of a disservice unintentionally to patrons because we still have a lot of people who aren't interested in streaming, either because they don't want to spend the money or there are technical barriers. They have limited access to broadband or Wi-Fi. They're not used to using smart TVs and things like that. And so we end up just having these gaps in the collection that we can't really account for. And then we do spend a good amount of time thinking about what we're going to do with dead and dying formats. So like playaways are still popular with little kids and certain adults, so we're going to keep them for a while. But we used to have MP3 audiobooks, which were quite expensive, and hardly anyone has MP3 players anymore, so we don't do that anymore. Music CDs have been pretty stagnant in our community. Most cars don't even have CD players in them anymore, but we have enough usage that we've left the amount of dollars apportioned to it exactly the same for, I think, 9 years now. I haven't upped the budget. And we moved to a new building, and every other collection got a larger footprint when we moved to this new building in 2020. Music CDs did not. And so it's kind of maintained at its rate with the expectation that in the next 5 years it's going to drop off. I think the big challenge is, although there are a lot of great music resources for individual patrons out there like Spotify and Pandora, there aren't a lot of really good tools for libraries to grab onto yet to allow us to fully move away from that physical format. Audiobooks on CD, it's fairly similar with playaways in that the very young and the older tend to like them. So we tend to move towards those more for that age group. And then we recently did away with things like read-along kits because there are new, better tools out there like Voxbooks, for example, that are an all-in-one that have both the audio and the physical book with it. So we're spending more money on those kinds of things. So that's, in general, how we approach our AV.
Thanks, Evan. I'm curious if you want to answer, if anybody else does. I have just noticed a lot more questions that come actually to me as a consultant about the read-along things. There seems to be more people out there who want to have that print, not just kids, but who want to have that print as well as some kind of audio. Have you guys seen that?
We have seen some, and for the most part, we don't have specific like kits or sets put together for that, but we try to make sure for the popular items that we have the physical book and an audio version of it. We're spending increasing amounts of money on e-audio through bridges to try and meet some of that demand, because we have patrons who like to listen to it through their own mobile device while also checking out the physical item. There are a couple of companies make combined resources. I mentioned the Vox books. Initially it was picture books and easy readers, but they've now expanded to chapter books, where they have a playing device attached directly to the cover that uses a similar technology to the playaway to read the book as you turn the pages. Like, it'll give you instructions on when to turn the page, like a classic read along, but it's all in one, and then you can just easily charge it and not have to worry about discs plus a book or a player plus a book. It's all in one, and we're spending more money on those. We haven't had the resources yet to expand those into like chapter books as much as other libraries have, and so far there haven't been any adult versions of them out that I've seen.
All right, thank you. Tabitha, you want to talk a little bit about some of the juvenile AV things that you work with?
Sure. And I was just going to say, we get that question all the time about having the print and the audio together in adults. They like to switch back and forth. In fact, we have a few patrons that will put both versions of the book on hold and try and time it so they can check them out together.
That is interesting. That, to me, that's sort of a new thing. I hadn't been hearing about that before. It's sort of recent. Did you have anything else then with the juvenile that you wanted to talk about there?
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
So a lot of the same things that Evan was saying, we've noticed a change. Not as many people have CD players at home. Kids are really enjoying the playaways here. Adults too. We've shifted quite a bit of our money just because there are no juvenile movie releases, or there are very few. I shouldn't say no or zero. It's changed. They've kept so many things streaming that every month I always feel like I have to play detective and go searching and hunting and trying to find out what is coming out. Part of deciding what we're buying, we look at hold copy ratios. We are the same as the other library, 5 to 1. We look at things that are requested, not owned, that are they've been published within the last year. We also look at things like orphaned holds. It's a report that we run that covers books that aren't owned, that have been requested. Maybe they were lost or destroyed. We look at relative use. We look at things that are what we call hot and cold, that are more than 2 years old. Like if something's going to be adapted into a movie, maybe it becomes popular again, or vice versa. Maybe there's a new edition of the book or a new volume to a series. Our juvenile AV and digital awards are something that we also consider. We have a few that we buy every time, of course, like Caldecott, as far as books go. Also, we look at movies that have gotten awards for animation. Our juvenile DVDs and Blu-rays are mostly just animated. The only live action that we have in our library are rated G. As far as new releases, again, I spend every month kind of going through trying to figure out what's coming out. I am signed up on several mailing lists, like for Sony Pictures, Paramount, things like that. So I can get notifications when new things are coming out. And I know somebody else mentioned that they're pretty much ordering from Amazon. We've made the same move. That in itself is a challenge because they re-release things. You constantly will find things popping up and it's like, well, that's not new. That came out in 2012. As far as the current trends with things not coming out on DVD, we've shifted some of our funding from juvenile DVDs to other things like Playways, the Box and Wonder books. We've also really been promoting the Canopy for Kids, which seems to be growing. Our playways are also doing really well here, I think partially because we have a lot of rural patrons that might not have the same internet access as someone who is living in a larger city. And that's pretty much it as far as what I had to share.
Thank you. I'm going to keep going and move on ahead to our next topic, and that is, I know there are a lot of libraries that are really getting into the idea of non-traditional materials. So I want to talk a little bit about how you guys select for a library of things. And I think we've got Erin up on that one first.
Yeah. Let me go ahead and I'll share my screen here. Okay, can you see that? There we go.
Yep, now we see it.
I will move on to my next slide here. So here's my email address if anybody has some questions about how some of this functions. So we started doing what we call Spark Kits in 2016, started out with a very small number of cheap kits. Now, cheap is key when you're trying this stuff out because there's a little bit of trial and error to see what your community is going to be interested in. So we just had 9 kits and it was 3 different types with 3 copies essentially. And we would keep them shelved in their Dewey subject area. So for example, we had a crochet kit and had it over with the 600s, like, or 700s, wherever crochet is. So we kept it with the craft stuff. So that people looking at crochet books could say like, oh, okay, well, I'll try this out. So there's a little bit of a mix of equipment that we want back, and then some things that we would consider consumable. So for the crochet kit, we're giving out yarn. But we would like the hook back. We would like the instructional book back. We have a couple of extra little pieces in there to help. So this has grown considerably over the years. Now we have about 60 kits. Just within the last couple of months, we've condensed them into a section. So rather than have them out in the Dewey areas, we've got them all together and we saw the circulation just go nuts. So about 50 to 60% of them are checked out at any given time. So we're thrilled with that because they did have a tendency to get kind of lost when we have a little bird watching kit with binoculars and like an Iowa bird book. And we had it over with the other books about birds and no one was finding it. So we have a mix of like hobbies, some fitness equipment, just real basic stuff. I have a picture here of our laminator, which has a holds list on it, like to the point that we have bought 5 of them now because people are so interested in this thing that they'll probably only need to use every once in a while, but don't want to have to like buy one for themselves. So we found just a cheap little 1-page laminator on Amazon for like $25. We circulate them with 5 little like lamination pockets and people love them. Like they're never on the shelf. So kind of thinking about what are some of the maybe not crucial needs in your community, but what are the interests, and have fun with it and keep it cheap. So we do have them in the catalog. So we do have catalog records for them, but we also have a section on our website that features our Spark Kits together. So if someone comes in to browse around on the website first, they can put something on hold and have it waiting on the hold shelf for them. Otherwise, I think we're getting a lot of interest just from browsing because we have our section now. So that was what I had for that. Let me see if I can unshare here.
All right, Kathy,
Okay.
Welcome back. And we are ready for you if you want to talk a little bit about your library of things. and how you do that?
Yes, we started a couple years ago, and it was probably, I think our most popular thing has been the radon detector, and we also have a metal detector that's been very popular. We kind of had a team of librarians. Actually, our collection development department wasn't doing a ton with this when it started. We had a Library of Things team that put together a list, and they worked on that. So we started with probably about 20 or 30 items, and they've been very popular. They are just housed at our central library for right now, but we are thinking of expanding it to the branches. We have grown it a lot through patron suggestions. People have got lots of ideas of what they would like to borrow. So it's been a mixture of a lot of technology items and some tools. So that's kind of how we've grown ours. We are going to probably start working more, collection development will start working more with Library of Things, we think, coming this spring, because we're hoping to really grow that out. The other thing we do have is a game collection that we kind of tie into Library of Things. And we also have some juvenile items that we had been branding as STEM kits, but we think we're going to bring those into a Library of Things Junior.
Oh, that's cool. Melody, do you have some information for us about kits?
I do. I have one quick slide. I'm not the selector for this, so this is information from other people who do the selection. So we do have discovery kits. You can find them by going into our catalog, doing an advanced search, and with the call number search, just put in discovery kits. And so we budget about $700 for adult items and $500 for kids items. We buy through Amazon pretty much exclusively for them. So our process for that is the selector decides what to add to the kit. Then we just get in touch with acquisitions, tell them what we want to buy. We catalog everything, which is why you can see them in, like, we don't have images for them, but they do show up as being able to place a hold in the catalog. And then, processing, and then they hit the shelf. I don't believe we like, all of our adult discovery kits are not browsable. So that's fully search the catalog and put a hold on it process. And off the top of my head, I don't spend a ton of time in the children's room. But I know that our Read With Me kits are definitely browsable. And I'd have to double check about whether the discovery kits are too. One reason an adult discovery kit is not browsable is because it has like a $300 telescope in it. So that's one of our more interesting kits. But it is a challenge for us to put together, just because of having to keep track of all the pieces. If something goes missing, replacing it could be hard. And so as far as how many kits we had 12 adult and 14 juvenile for this past year. And then our circulation might not be as good as some of you all's, but it's, we had 28 adult checkouts, and the juvenile ones were definitely more popular there. As far as the constraints we put on that, what do we require a kit to have? We don't do consumable anything. So the laminating kit is not something we would currently buy, but it has to be of a certain size. It has to fit in the bags that we have. It has to be like the price has to be low enough that we could buy a replacement, and we wouldn't be charging a person an arm and a leg for a replacement for that. And then we have to be able to buy it from a vendor that will take our tax deductible form. We're not going to buy puzzles or any games with a ton of pieces. I don't think we circulate games at all. And everything has to be easy to clean. So we're not going to add like a stuffy to a kit. But it has to be, we have to be able to wipe it down and just kind of make it nice and pretty for the next person. So that's, oops, sorry, I got out of control. All right. Did I ever actually share my slide there? Oh,
No.
sorry. Well,
Right.
You'll get it. We'll get it later.
Yes, everybody will see it. Sam has said that we're going to put all these
Yeah.
together and have them, so
Yep.
all of our attendees will be
There
able
for
to
the
get all the
future.
information. Thank you. Yep. Great. Let's see, who else did I have? Anybody else have anything they want to share about that? Otherwise, I'll head on to the youth materials.
I would just add that we also circulate games and kits here. Not in my wheelhouse, but I do know like how we handle our games. I oversee circulation. We generally have volunteers come in to help with counting the game pieces. We have some teams that need, those volunteer hours for things. And other than that, if there's downtime, a circ clerk will grab a game and they will count the pieces and get it back out on the shelf. And they are probably one of our most popular collections if you've got the time to deal with it. People like to try something before they buy it.
But I love the idea of using volunteers. I don't know that I've ever heard of anybody doing that, because that's one of the reasons I hear a lot of people tell me we just can't do the games as much as we'd like to see the CERC from that, because it's just too time consuming to check all of that. That's a great idea. I like that. Andrew, you want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you have to think about when you are purchasing youth materials? We've heard about fiction and nonfiction. Are there differences in how you purchase those items for kids?
Yes. All right. Okie doke. So I guess so. A lot of the I think everyone has mentioned like all of the tools that I use like on a regular basis. So I feel I kind of went on a different route with some of these points in terms of just other considerations that you have to make when thinking of a youth collection. I mean, I use Booklist and all of Baker and Taylor's resources. I get thousands of emails from all the publishers, and all of that goes into consideration. But I think a lot of what I'm focusing on is kind of like once I have the item, what do I do with it, and how like thinking about that. So that was just my original slide. So 12 years ago now, the North Liberty Library, we converted from Dewey to BISAC, which is, I wrote it down, book industry standards and communication. So it's essentially the bookstore model. It is a lot of work, but just in terms of having precisely what the book is about, instead of not hiding it, having it coded with, a random string of numbers, can be confusing, and sometimes with kids as well. So I know I've fielded a lot of questions from folks over the past 10 years about considerations in doing this, and most of the times they are thinking about doing it with kids. The picture I do have here is from the adult collection, but we do have it library-wide. So I love my statistics, and I guess basically I know some folks down the line are going to be talking about statistics too, but I was thinking, hey, they might not do a chart exactly the way I do. So for our board, granted, this was in November, I was comparing just how, in addition to the BISAC, we also do have genres for every fiction category as well. So this is sort of how our juvenile genres were circulating in November of 2015 versus this year. I'm just going to go back and forth a little bit. Juvenile graphic novel is the light blue in the upper left corner, has exploded over the past 8 years. Fantasy has gotten bigger, which actually surprised me. It was as slow as it was in 15. But yeah, base juvenile fiction has kind of shrunk. And then, whoops, sorry. You can also tell in this phase, we had a juvenile inspirational section, which I inherited from my predecessor. And I feel our community kind of grew out of that. And then the publishers weren't reissuing titles in a series that folks perhaps wanted. New stuff they didn't like. They wanted the old stuff they were used to. So basically, don't be afraid of eliminating a collection. Uh, Again, I know we're going to talk about stats down the line a little bit, but we have a statistical model that we've been using basically since I started 8 years ago, that we run multiple reports a month that like get funneled into this thing. So this mid-month report that has a status, the circulation status of every item in the collection, and then monthly circulation stats that have renewals separated out. Anyway, it boils down to these lovely charts that tell me, hey, based on how many you have in your collection and how many are checked out right now, you should probably be buying this many easy readers and this many juvenile fiction and this many juvenile fantasy. So I have these nice targets to go by, but sometimes like my independent reader here is kind of low. I think sometimes I order something with the intent of putting it in a particular collection, and then it gets here, and I decide, oh, this is a little bit older reading level than I want for independent, so it goes into juvenile fiction. So I sometimes get a little messed up on that. We also did do a diversity audit while we were locked down, when we had kind of all the time in the world to devote to it. So we started with teen, then we went to juvenile, and then we've done primary. We have outline for adult, but we have not gone through with it yet because the world restarted basically. This can be a really useful tool in terms of, hey, I want more diverse stuff in my, like, I'm surprised the queer collection is kind of low representative in primary. Race is really high, and it's because picture books, you can have images of like minority characters that aren't necessarily the main character. So this sometimes can skew and make you think that, oh, I have a nice racially diverse collection, but really it doesn't point to the quality of the material. And then also with picture books, so many are animals, so hard to assign a race to, a squirrel and a bear. If you have a say in, especially, so I know some libraries have like a completely separate room or a completely separate level for like their youth collection. Ours runs right up against adult. We don't have a nice hard line. So if you have some say in arrangement of the collections, utilize that or figure out a way to get in on it. So right here on the far left, that is our juvenile nonfiction, and then it comes up against some of the adult genre fiction. So we very intentionally placed the adult inspirational right there. At one point, the adult graphic novels were closer, and we had a very infamous incident amongst staff of a 5-year-old finding an issue of The Walking Dead and mom saying, "Look at what my baby found." So we keep that as far away as possible, just so that so incidents like that don't happen. So then I also think as I was saying before about, hey, I got purchases with the intention of putting in independent, but then I realized, hey, it's 200 pages, maybe that goes in juvenile. I purchased this Taylor Swift book with the intention of putting in an adult, but I was flipping through it. It's sort of the size of kind of a oversized magazine. It's like every other page is like a full color picture. It's got, some of the quotes split out. Kids read this stuff, and I think kids will get more out of this book than an adult would. So I did put it in juvenile. I guess just be open when flipping through materials when you get them, and there's potential for it to go maybe where you didn't initially intend. This one is a little harder. So sometimes you can see this book right here is like 2 inches taller than the rest of the books and is much thinner. It looks more like a traditional picture book. The title in question is Can I Touch Your Hair? It's poems about respecting bodily autonomy of everyone. Um, and then I took a picture of the interior over here. Whoops, sorry. Uh, one of the poems in it is called The N Bomb. So we didn't want to put it in primary because it's not really a narrative picture book. So we ended up putting it in juvenile, but because of the size of it, no grade schooler checked it out because they didn't want to be seen. It looks like a picture book. So I'm actually going to be moving it to our juvenile nonfiction because it's just not getting circulated as a juvenile fiction book. It will probably go like in social science, like discrimination. You can check. We do use Baker and Taylor for everything. I know it's like an extra step, but occasionally I do look at the dimensions of the book just to sort of see, is this going to be like a weird oversized thing that's too old to go in picture books, but maybe won't look like a traditional chapter book, things like that. So then format of the book can also be tricky. I have increasingly started purchasing intentionally paperback books for the juvenile nonfiction section because that kind of builds in an obsolescence, especially like in certain sciences and biographies. This biography of Barack Obama is already out of date, and then I have another one. This one is hardback. So I think sometimes with the hardback, it's harder to justify to yourself, hey, I spent $50 on this. I should keep it in longer, even though it's already 3 years out of date. So sometimes purchasing something with the intention of, hey, I know it's going to wear out, and then you don't have to have a fight with yourself later, I think is helpful. And then also, I know it's not always easy to tell from descriptions, but sometimes in my observations, books that have full colored photos do circulate better. But then, of course, the Who Was series, which is all hand-drawn illustrations, has kind of thrown that statistic off for me as well. And sorry, I'm going a little long here. If you can, make friends with your school librarian, or even better, the school library secretary. They will be able to tell you what projects all the students have on a yearly basis. Like, oh, every March we do a biography project for all the fourth graders. So then you could have all of your biography books set out, ready to go for when those students come in. Kids' books, especially like those early chapter books, are kind of dominated by series. I don't feel overly beholden to have every single one in a series. I usually get like the first three and then sort of see how they circulate and if we get requests for more. I think especially with kid stuff, there are sales reps who are more than happy to help you select things. I don't want to besmirch anyone, but I don't personally like sales reps. It's not intentional. It is definitely on me, but I feel pressure to buy something. If they took the time to call me or to come and show me their stuff, well, I better buy something. So I don't take calls from sales reps anymore. And some will, send you the box that, oh, you can pick whichever ones you want and just send the ones you don't want back, and we'll send you a box every month. And I feel you almost get into almost like a payday loan situation where you're always sort of a month behind in terms of sending back. I know that for smaller libraries, it can help with selection process, but there was a point that a junior libraries guild salesman called me and was telling me all the great things that were in their next box. And as they were going through them, it's like, I've got all those already. And I remember she, well, how do you have all of those? And I then responded with, how do you think I spend my day? I mean, and I was doing programming at that point, but like knowing what's coming out, I mean, it I'm not besmirching anyone who relies on these folks, but I find it too much of a high pressure situation for myself. So then I'm ending on my beloved David Rose. Just so listen, I don't have a lot to my name right now, but I do have one thing. To which Roland responds, "What, your pride?" And David says, "No, my taste." I think everyone is going to, in a position like this, has a taste. I mean, my personal taste is extremely narrow, and almost no one in my library really would read that. But I feel my taste has grown such that I know the taste of everyone in the community, like what my community wants. So yeah, I guess if you're just getting started, yeah, just develop your taste, or trust that you have it, I guess. And then there is my contact information if there are any questions, and I know the slides will be shared. And that is everything for me.
Thank you. That was a great way to kind of get at some of those things that we didn't really have in any of those questions. I really appreciated your different take on that. I think that worked really well. Evan, I would like you to come up next to talk about youth materials if you've got some things to share there. We've got a couple more questions that I'm going to kind of skip through because I really want to get to this end piece after Evan is done on collection assessments, and I'm going to take them a little bit out of order. So panelists, be ready for that. Evan, what I'll do is ask you to talk first quick about the youth materials, and then if you want to head into that idea of collection assessments that you were going to talk about, so you can just stay and go right into that. Thanks.
Okay, I'll try to be brief because I know how late it is. With youth materials, our number 2 circulating collection overall is picture books. So we spend a lot of money and time on picture books. The median age in Ankeny is 30.5, so that means a lot of young parents with a lot of little kids. And so I think probably that is where we spend the bulk of our time and effort. As a result, we focus a lot on special characters that are of continual appeal. So we buy a lot of Disney Princess, we buy a lot of Star Wars, we buy a lot of Lego, we buy a lot of the TV show adaptations. So like right now, Bluey, for example, we buy a lot of Bluey, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, because those circulate the best. And we actually even physically shelve them separately from the rest of the picture books because of their high demand. Outside of picture books, the juvenile graphic and YA graphic do extraordinarily well. But one of the challenges that we face are manga series. There are so many manga series and they run for so long. But if you don't get in at the beginning of a manga run, they'll often go out of print and be hard to get. So you have to stay really up on that to try and catch those. And some of even the major popular ones like Naruto and Dragon Ball, which are very old series, really, they still are very popular, but every once in a while, early parts of it go out of print. And so you just have to really stay on top of it. Just in our experience, YA nonfiction is a waste of money. There are very few YA nonfiction books that circulate here. Most of our teens looking for nonfiction go straight to the adults, particularly the series nonfiction where it'll be like opposing viewpoints or a topical like drugs in America or immigration. They'll be $70 or $80 a book, and then they won't go out at all. So we steer very clear of them. When it comes to ordering these things, just like with the adult materials, we use notification carts and standing orders for series. So like the Pigeon books, for example, anytime a new one comes out, we want to make sure that we grab that. I generally also don't like to take calls from sales reps. I don't really care about unsolicited emails from vendors or publishers or marketers. But I do have really good experience with Penworthy. But we just get decision wizards from them. It's just a website where you pull up and it shows a slew of things that you can check yes or no in order for that upcoming month. Because Penworthy does a really good job capturing a lot of those popular picture books and readers, so the special characters that are of interest. So generally, I align with Andrew's view on these things, but Penworthy for us has worked out really well. they also, one of the things I'm always concerned about is timeliness. And you place an order with Penworthy, and in 2 days you got the box of books. And so that's really hard to beat. Now, one thing that's been growing steadily for us that seems a little contrary to a lot of what I've talked about earlier today is Ankeny has a very large and ever-growing contingent of homeschoolers. A lot of this was driven by the pandemic, but not exclusively. And a lot of homeschoolers use curricula that they consider are tried and true. And so they will be looking for books that might be 20 or 30 years old. And so I tend to start buying more of those older books for the younger audiences. Now, more on the fiction entertainment side rather than on the nonfiction educational side, because I don't want to buy stuff that's really not current or that's inaccurate. But it's just something to be aware of, that you can't have some, at least in my opinion, a really hard and fast rule that we can't buy anything that's like more than 3 or 5 years old, because there may be an element of your community that's looking for that kind of resource. And at least for us, that big driving factor is those homeschool families and the curricula that they share and they use and want to have those resources for. So I'm meeting the community demand that way by buying older books, whereas in most cases, I'm not meeting the community's need by buying older resources. That would more likely be an interlibrary loan kind of situation. But with the homeschoolers, though so many of them, they will continue to circulate and do well. So I get a lot of bang for my buck that way. Which I'll segue then onto collection assessment, because that's what I'm interested in, is making sure I'm using my limited funds to the best of my ability. All of our reports that we use come from our ILS. We use Polaris. So we used a combination of the mediocre quality canned reports, and then we pay a little bit extra for a tool called Simply Reports that allows us to do more granular searching. I run regular hold reports, like I said, to keep up with that demand for my holds ratio. I look very carefully at turnover rates. Those can be tricky because it basically tells you for a given item in a particular collection or subset of a collection how many times it's expected to turn over, how many times it's expected to check out in a year. If the collection is too small, your turnover rate is going to be really enormous, and so it might make it look like it's really a great collection when in reality you don't have enough. It's just the nature of the math for that. And if your collection is really enormous, that might have the opposite effect and drive down that turnover rate. So I also compare that to a cost per circ report that I do, and that's really just averaging out the cost of a typical item for a particular collection, and then the average number of circs for that collection, and it gives you a metric that tells you how much bang for a buck you can expect from anything within that collection, and then you can compare it to how individual items are doing. And there's wide range of variety in that kind of report. So like our picture books, the cost per circ is about 0.00015 cents per circulation because they go out so much. Whereas a YA playaway, which is has the worst cost per circ, is about $8 per circ. So when I'm looking to see how series or new titles or areas are doing, I can look at it and see, okay, well, this cost per circ is actually significantly higher than the average for that collection. So I'm not getting my bang for my buck. And it can be useful also when making weeding decisions. And then, of course, I just keep track of monthly circulation totals, see what collections or subsections are doing well and what aren't, and try and discern if there's something I need to address. And so, for example, when I first started here, our sciences, so the 500s, were doing abysmally. And to me, it looked like that's just because we don't have enough science topics, popular science topics, new resources. So I spent an enormous amount of collection dollars rebuilding that collection because my predecessor just didn't, and then watched as the circ rate did not improve whatsoever. And so that can kind of tell you that aside from a few really popular science titles at Ankeny, there's not a need to have a really big, robust collection. So I don't spend as much collection dollars on that. And then I also, I'm a little old school. I just like physically working with the collection. So I look at our reshelving carts to see what's coming in, what's going out. I look at our hold shelves to see what people are putting on hold, and I watch our display shelves to see what's moving out and what's coming in, what things are staying static, and that gives me a sense of general changes in reading interest or areas where I might want to buff up the collection or maybe not spend as much money on. So sorry, that was a little fast, but that's how we assess everything.
Thank you. I really like the advice there at the end. I think there's some really good stuff in there. I think due to where we're at for time, Erin, do you have about 2 minutes that you can share with us about using
Sure.
Baker and Taylor on
Yeah.
DEI? We had a question on that, so I'd like to hit that one.
Yeah. Okay. Can y'all see that okay?
Yep.
Okay. So it's very, very recent, but we just contracted with Baker and Taylor to use their DEI reporting module through Collection HQ. So we don't have the full suite of Collection HQ. It's not in our budget to do that. But you can get a separate DEI module for it that is a fraction of the Collection HQ price. So how that works is it's based on not your catalog records, but their catalog records. So there's no physically looking at the collection. We did a lot of physical audits over the course of the pandemic and worked really hard in our young adult collections. But obviously adult is a whole different thing. So this is an automated way to do that. But with the caveat is that there's not as much care and thought that goes into it because it is an automated process. So you are exporting your records, they're comparing it with their database and giving you statistics based on that comparison. They look at these topics that I've got listed here on the slide. If there's a little caret next to it, that means that it breaks down into further categories. Some of it's a little bit blunt, like there's not a lot of nuance to the reflection of gender or sexuality. There's just a handful of categories underneath that. We've just gotten our results and we're kind of looking through, okay, what do we do with this information? Our lowest in terms of diversity is adult fiction, which is not a big surprise to me. I think we all feel the pressure of the holds lists. And that tends to be buying multiple copies of that same, the same 20 authors that are at the top of the bestseller list every month. So that's an easy place for us to start. I think overall, this reporting would, in a sense, underreport your diversity. Because again, it's looking at catalog records, it's not looking at illustrations, not looking at a little bit more of that nuance that you may get from physically looking at the items. But I do feel like it's a place to start. They are actively developing this product, so they do occasionally add new categories, break things down a little bit finer. This is a year-long subscription, so we'll export again in another couple of months. And you can kind of start making some comparisons over the course of the year, especially if you're focusing on one particular area. For us, our adult fiction collection is 70,000 items. And so seeing a major change in those percentage points means an enormous amount of stuff. So the progress may come slow, but I think it's important to look at and consider when you're making your purchasing selections. So we're just kind of at the start of the process, but I'm excited to see where it goes. So that's what I've got for that.
Great, thank you. And we are at time. I think we could spend another whole hour doing this. We skipped a whole bunch of stuff, you guys, that they all had things prepped and ready to go, especially some of the DEI things. And I think that whole idea, several of you kind of alluded to it, and it came up in one of our questions, that balance between, the bang for your buck and buying those multiple copies of things that we know is going to go out versus we still want to make sure we have something for everybody in that collection and having that diverse collection. So I would just like to say thank you to this panel. I hope you guys all enjoyed what they were able to bring to this as people who are doing this as part of their daily job. So thank you to the panel. I think we did have a couple of questions come through that what I'd like to ask my panel, if it's all right with you guys, is if I wrote those up, sent you an email, would you mind writing a paragraph to answer some of those questions? If you got time, great. If not, between the 6 of you, I think somebody will probably do that. And we'll try to get that posted in I Will Learn, if that's okay with you guys.
Definitely.
Great. The other thing I might do is tap some of you. I think it's probably time to do another webinar on diversity audits. I think we've done something before, but I think it might be time to do that. So you may be being asked to be part of another panel as we get going on this. So thank you. Sam, you want to jump in here for me?
Nope, just thanks to the panel for your time today. Thanks to Becky for organizing all of this. I knew an hour and a half was going to be tight when I saw some of the expert names on this list. But I am thankful to everyone who shared about just the wide variety of collection development tips, tricks, techniques, best practices in your libraries today. So thanks to Becky, thanks to the panel, and everyone enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye
Thank
all.
you.